Imagine being stuck in heavy traffic on a sprawling highway in Los Angeles, already late for a crucial meeting. Your hands clench the steering wheel, your heart races, and an internal monologue begins. This shouldn't be happening. Why did I take this route? The city needs to fix these roads. In that moment, you are not just experiencing a traffic jam, you are engaged in an exhausting, invisible war with reality. This constant friction, the gap between what is actually happening and how we think it should be happening, is the silent drain on our mental energy. We are endlessly negotiating with life, demanding it follow the script we wrote in our heads. True freedom, as taught in the Buddhist tradition, begins not with altering the external world, but with radically altering how we relate to it. The parable of the two arrows, pain versus suffering. Life is not a perfectly paved, endless highway. It is rugged, unpredictable, and entirely indifferent to our personal preferences. The Buddha never promised a life free of hardship, nor did he suggest that enlightenment meant walking through the world completely numb to its sharp edges. He was a profound realist. He observed that simply having a human body means you will, at some point, experience sickness, aging, and physical discomfort. Having a human heart means you will inevitably experience loss, heartbreak, and grief. This inherent, unavoidable friction of existence is what the Buddhist tradition refers to as dukkha. It is the reality of our condition. To explain how we experience this reality, the Buddha offered the brilliant and timeless parable of the two arrows. Imagine you are walking through a dense forest, and suddenly, out of nowhere, you are struck by a stray arrow. The physical pain is sharp, undeniable, and immediate. You bleed, you ache. This first arrow represents the unavoidable tragedies and discomforts of human existence. It is the sudden layoff from a career you dedicated a decade to. It is the ending of a relationship you truly believed would last forever. It is the frightening medical diagnosis, or the phone call in the middle of the night carrying heavy news. This first arrow is shot by life itself. It is largely outside of our control. And most importantly, being struck by this first arrow does not mean you are being punished, nor does it mean you have failed. It simply means you are a living, breathing human being participating in the world. But what happens next is where the true tragedy of the human experience often unfolds. The Buddha taught that when the uninstructed person is struck by this first arrow of pain, they do not merely feel the physical or emotional ache. Instead, they sorrow, they grieve, they lament, they panic, and they become deeply distraught. It is as if, having just been shot by one painful arrow, they immediately pick up a second arrow and stab themselves with it. This second arrow represents our reaction to the pain. It is the elaborate, torturous story we tell ourselves about the event that just occurred. The first arrow is the loss of the job, the second arrow is the internal voice screaming, "I am a complete failure, I will never recover from this, why does this always happen to me?" The first arrow is the sharp physical ache in your back. The second arrow is the profound frustration, anger, and fear that you are broken and will never be able to enjoy your life again. We shoot this second arrow every single time we reject reality, when we argue passionately with what has already happened, or when we try to bargain with the universe to change the past. The pain is the actual event. The suffering is the heavy, suffocating narrative we attach to the event. If you pause and look closely at your own life, you might realize that almost all of your lingering misery, the kind that keeps you awake at 3 a.m., comes from this second arrow. The initial pain of a broken heart, while devastating, is clean. It is raw, it is natural, and just like a deep physical wound, if kept clean and given space, it will eventually close and heal over time. but the second arrow actively infects the wound. We ruminate on the past. We imagine alternative futures that will never come to pass. We demand to know why. If only I had said this differently, if only they hadn't done that, this is completely unfair. This mental spiraling does not change the past by even a single second, but it effectively ruins the present. We become so deeply accustomed to carrying the heavy burden of the second arrow that we forget we are the ones holding the bow. It is vital, however, to approach this realization with immense self-compassion. Recognizing that we cause our own suffering can sometimes lead to shooting yet another arrow, the arrow of guilt. We might think, I shouldn't be reacting this way, I'm failing at mindfulness, I'm so weak. But remember, the mind's tendency to defend itself, to argue, to rationalize, and to resist is a deeply ingrained survival mechanism. It is human nature. For thousands of generations, our human brains were wired to scan for threats and try to control our environment to keep us safe. So, when you catch yourself holding that second arrow, do not punish yourself. The path to freedom does not require achieving a state of robotic perfection where you never have a negative thought or a moment of resistance. The path to freedom begins in a very tiny, almost invisible space. It is the gap between the first arrow striking and the drawing of the second arrow. When the first arrow hits, there is a fraction of a second before the mind rushes in to judge, to blame, and to fight. In that tiny pause lies our ultimate liberation. It is the choice to simply be with the pain without adding a destructive story to it. When sadness arises, we can gently say, "Here is sadness," without adding, "I shouldn't be sad." By dropping the second arrow, we allow the clean pain of the first arrow to move through us naturally. We feel it fully, and because we do not trap it with our resistance, it is finally free to pass. Redefining acceptance, power, not passivity. When we hear the word acceptance in modern Western culture, our immediate instinct is often to push back. We are raised in a society that champions relentless progress, fixing problems, and fighting fiercely against the odds. In this context, acceptance sounds suspiciously like surrender. It sounds like giving up, letting life walk all over you, or becoming a passive victim of circumstance. We worry that if we accept a toxic work environment, it means we approve of it. We fear that if we accept an illness, it means we are giving up the will to heal. This fundamental misunderstanding keeps so many of us trapped in an exhausting cycle of resistance. We fight reality because we falsely believe that acknowledging it equals defeat. But in the practice of mindfulness and Zen, acceptance is the exact opposite of weakness. It is, in fact, the highest form of courage. True acceptance, what modern psychologists sometimes call radical acceptance, is not about approving of a painful situation or declaring that what happened was right or fair. It is simply the profound, brave act of acknowledging that the situation is happening. It is the conscious decision to drop the exhausting struggle of wishing this exact moment were different. Imagine standing outside in a torrential downpour. Resistance is standing there, getting soaked to the bone, while screaming at the sky that it shouldn't be raining, that the forecast promised sunshine, and that this weather is deeply unfair to your plans. Acceptance is looking up, recognizing, it is raining right now, and then calmly opening an umbrella or finding shelter. Acceptance does not mean you enjoy the rain, it simply means you stop arguing with the clouds. You choose to see clearly, which allows you to respond wisely rather than react blindly. As we begin to walk this path, however, there is a very subtle and dangerous trap we often fall into, the trap of false acceptance, sometimes known in psychology as spiritual bypassing. We read the beautiful teachings, we practice our breathing, and we decide that we are going to be completely zen about everything that goes wrong. We put on a mask of serene detachment. When our heart is shattered, we tell ourselves, everything is impermanent, so I shouldn't be so upset. When someone crosses our boundaries or treats us poorly, we swallow our justified anger and force a smile, thinking we are successfully practicing non-attachment. This is not acceptance. This is suppression dressed up in spiritual clothing. It is an intellectual trick we play on ourselves to avoid the messy, uncomfortable reality of human emotion. True mindfulness does not ask you to become an emotionless stone or to pretend that your wounds do not bleed. When we practice spiritual bypassing, we are still deeply resisting reality, we are just resisting our internal reality. We are denying our own genuine grief, our own natural fear, and our own valid anger. True acceptance must embrace everything, including our own human fragility. If you feel profound sorrow because someone you deeply love is no longer here, acceptance means saying to yourself, I am hurting deeply right now, and that is entirely okay. It means allowing the tears to fall without judgment or shame. If you happen to open a drawer, find a forgotten photograph, and a sudden wave of painful longing washes over you, you do not scold yourself for not being enlightened enough to have moved on. You gently hold that grief, recognizing it as the beautiful, inevitable echo of having loved someone genuinely. The ache in your chest is not a failure of your spiritual practice, it is the absolute proof of your humanity. We must remember a simple truth: we cannot heal what we refuse to acknowledge. You cannot navigate your way out of a dark, frightening forest if you keep insisting that you are already safely at home. Acceptance is merely finding your exact location on the map of your life. It is the necessary starting point of all genuine transformation. Once you stop wasting your precious life force fighting the reality of your current situation, a remarkable amount of energy is suddenly freed up. You can use that reclaimed energy to heal, to rebuild your life, to set healthy boundaries, or to take compassionate action. The Buddha himself did not sit quietly under the Bodhi tree and passively watch the world suffer. He achieved a profound, unshakable acceptance of reality, and from that deep, grounded clarity, he spent the next 45 years actively walking across India, teaching, and alleviating suffering wherever he went. So, how do we redefine acceptance in our daily lives? We start by softening. We begin to notice the places in our physical body and our mind where we are braced against the world, the tight jaw, the tense shoulders, the endless mental loop of, why is this happening to me? And in that moment of noticing, we take a slow, deep breath, inviting a gentle surrender. Not a surrender to the problem, but a surrender to the absolute truth of the moment. We say to ourselves, this is how things are right now. I don't like it, I didn't choose it, but it is here. In that simple, quiet acknowledgement, the heavy iron armor of resistance begins to crack. And it is only through those cracks that the warm light of true freedom finally has a chance to enter. Awakening through impermanence, the beauty of the fading light. One of the most profound sources of our daily exhaustion is the immense, unspoken effort we spend trying to freeze time. Deep down, human beings harbor a quiet, desperate wish for permanence. We want the people we love to remain exactly as they are today. We want our health to stay vibrant, our careers to remain secure, and our moments of joy to stretch out into eternity. We build psychological fortresses, routines, contracts, promises, and attachments, all designed to convince ourselves that the ground beneath our feet is solid and unchanging. But this is the grand illusion. We are standing on a river, trying to nail down the water. When the inevitable current of life eventually sweeps away something we hold dear, we feel deeply betrayed. We scream at the universe, completely forgetting that change is not a malfunction in the system of life, it is the system itself. In the Buddhist tradition, this universal truth is called anicca, or impermanence. It is the understanding that absolutely everything in the conditioned world is in a constant, restless state of flux. From the grandest mountain ranges being slowly worn down by the wind, to the microscopic cells in our own bodies regenerating every single second, nothing remains perfectly static. Even our internal landscapes, our fiercest angers, our deepest sorrows, and our most ecstatic joys, arise, linger for a while, and then eventually dissolve. Often, when we first encounter the concept of impermanence, it can feel incredibly melancholic, perhaps even terrifying. We mistakenly hear it as a grim warning that we will eventually lose everything we cherish. But if we look closer, with a calm and steady mind, we discover that impermanence is actually the very foundation of our true freedom. Consider, for a moment, a beautiful, delicate flower blooming in a garden. Why do we stop to admire it? Why do we bend down to smell its fragrance and carefully take a photograph of its petals? We do this precisely because we know, on an intuitive level, that it will not last. Within a few days, the petals will inevitably wither and fall to the earth. It is the extreme fragility of the flower that makes it so breathtakingly precious. If someone handed you a plastic flower, one that would never age, never change, and never die, you might appreciate its craftsmanship for a passing moment, but you would never feel a deep, soulful connection to it. We do not mourn the passing of plastic flowers. It is the very fact that the real flower is fading that demands our absolute presence. Its impermanence is the exact source of its profound beauty. The same principle applies to our own lives and the people we love. When we live under the heavy illusion that we have an endless amount of time, we take everything for granted. We leave important words unspoken. We rush through our mornings, distracted by our phones, barely noticing the face of the person sitting across from us at the breakfast table. We hold on to petty grudges because we subconsciously assume we have decades left to forgive and make amends. But when we truly awaken to anicca, when we deeply accept that this specific moment, this specific conversation, and this specific stage of our lives will never, ever happen again, everything radically shifts. The mundane suddenly becomes sacred. Awakening through impermanence does not mean we walk through the world in a state of constant grief or fearful anticipation of loss. On the contrary, it means we finally wake up from our sleepwalking. It is a gentle, urgent invitation to actually inhabit the life we are living right now. When we sit with a friend, we are fully there, listening with our entire being, knowing this interaction is uniquely fleeting. When we hug our children or our partners, we hold them with a profound, tender awareness, recognizing that they, too, are changing every single day. Embracing impermanence teaches us the delicate art of loving with open hands. We learn to fully experience the joys of life without desperately clenching our fingers around them when it is time for them to leave. And equally importantly, when we are traversing the dark, painful valleys of our lives, impermanence becomes our greatest comfort. We can whisper to ourselves, "This too shall pass." The anxiety, the physical pain, the crushing weight of a difficult chapter, none of it is permanent. It is all weather moving across the vast sky of our awareness. By accepting that everything is in motion, we stop trying to build a permanent home in a temporary moment. We finally learn to flow gracefully with the river, rather than exhausting ourselves fighting the current. The practice, moving from head to heart. If you have been listening to these concepts, recognizing the two arrows, redefining acceptance, an awakening to impermanence, a very natural, perhaps slightly frustrated question might be rising in your mind. You might be thinking, I understand all of this intellectually. It makes perfect logical sense. So why is it still so incredibly hard to actually live this way? Why do I still fall apart when life doesn't go my way? This is the most important question anyone on the path of personal awakening can ask. It points directly to the vast, undeniable canyon that exists between knowing something in your head and realizing something in your heart. In the modern Western world, we are deeply conditioned to believe that gathering information is the ultimate solution to our problems. We read the self-help books, we listen to the mindfulness podcasts on our morning commute, and we nod in agreement when we hear profound quotes about letting go. We build a magnificent library of spiritual concepts in our intellect. But intellectual understanding is merely the map, it is not the territory. You can study a highly detailed map of a beautiful mountain range for years, memorizing every peak and valley, but that will never substitute for the visceral experience of actually standing on the mountain, feeling the bitter wind against your face, and having your breath taken away by the altitude. Similarly, you cannot satisfy a deep physical hunger by simply reading a restaurant menu. You have to actually eat the meal. To bridge this gap, to move from the menu to the meal, we must transition from conceptual thinking to direct, lived experience. This bridge is built through consistent, dedicated practice. In the Buddhist tradition, this practice is deeply rooted in formal meditation, or mindfulness. Meditation is not, as many mistakenly believe, a mystical process of emptying the mind of all thoughts, nor is it a magical escape hatch from the messy realities of daily life. Rather, it is a deliberate, courageous laboratory where we practice the art of staying. It is the training ground where we learn to sit quietly with ourselves exactly as we are, without reaching for a distraction, without running away, and without picking up that second arrow of judgment. So, how do we begin this practice? It starts with radical simplicity. You find a quiet space, you take a comfortable seat, and you gently close your eyes or soften your gaze. You begin by simply noticing the undeniable physical reality of the present moment. You feel the weight of your body pressing against the chair or the cushion. You notice the sensation of your hands resting in your lap. And then, you bring your attention to the most reliable anchor you possess, your breath. You feel the cool air entering your nostrils, the subtle expansion of your chest and belly, and the warm release of the exhalation. You are not trying to control the breath or force it into a specific rhythm, you are merely witnessing it. Breathing in, I know that I am breathing in. Breathing out, I know that I am breathing out. Inevitably, within a matter of seconds, your mind will wander. It will pull you into the past, replaying a conversation from yesterday, or it will launch you into the future, planning what you need to buy at the grocery store or worrying about an upcoming deadline. When this happens, and it will happen continuously, you must be very careful. The untrained mind will immediately try to shoot the second arrow. It will judge you, I am terrible at this. I can't even focus for 1 minute. My mind is too chaotic. This is the crucial moment of the practice. Instead of fighting the distraction or judging yourself, you practice gentle acceptance. You simply note, thinking is happening, and with infinite patience and self-compassion, you gently guide your attention back to the physical sensation of the next breath. This simple act of returning, over and over and over again, is the heavy lifting of mindfulness. It is the bicep curl for your awareness. But the practice deepens profoundly when difficult emotions arise. Suppose you are sitting in quiet meditation, and suddenly, a wave of intense anxiety or a sharp pang of unprocessed grief washes over you. Your instinct will be to immediately resist it, to tense your muscles, to open your eyes, and to distract yourself. But here, on the cushion, we practice doing the exact opposite. We practice turning toward the pain. We drop the story, we drop the "why is this happening?" and the "how long will this last?" And we drop our attention down into the physical body. Where does this anxiety actually live in your body right now? Is it a tightness in your chest? A shallow fluttering in your stomach? A heavy aching in your throat? We bring our breath directly into that physical space. We imagine breathing spaciousness and warmth into that tight, frightened knot. We say to the emotion, "I see you. You are allowed to be here. I will hold space for you." This is the profound alchemy of presence. When we stop resisting the difficult emotion and simply allow it to exist as a physical sensation, it begins to lose its terrifying grip. We realize that an emotion is just energy moving through the body. It arises, it peaks, and, if we do not trap it with our resistance, it eventually passes away, just like a wave rolling back into the ocean. This formal practice on the cushion is what slowly rewires our nervous system. Over time, the spaciousness we cultivate in meditation begins to bleed out into our ordinary lives. We start to catch ourselves in real time. When we are stuck in that Los Angeles traffic jam, we notice the familiar tightening in our chest and the rising anger. But instead of automatically exploding or spiraling into frustration, we recognize the physical sensation. We take a deep breath. We drop the second arrow. We accept that we are in traffic, and we choose to listen to the radio or simply be present, rather than declaring war on the highway. This is a lifelong journey. You will not achieve perfect acceptance by next Tuesday. You will forget, you will react, you will lose your temper, and you will fall back into old patterns. That is perfectly fine, it is part of the human design. The beauty of this path is that the moment you realize you have lost your way, you are already back on the path. You simply take a breath, forgive yourself, and begin again. Acceptance is not a destination you arrive at, it is a direction you choose to walk, step by mindful step, back into the vibrant, beautiful, and deeply unpredictable reality of the present moment. Conclusion: equanimity, the sky and the weather. As we journey through this practice, as we learn to drop the heavy second arrow, as we step gracefully out of our exhausting war with reality, and as we intimately embrace the fleeting nature of all things, we eventually arrive at the true heart of the Buddhist path. We arrive at a state of being known as equanimity. In Pali, this is called upekkha. For many in the modern Western world, the word equanimity is frequently misunderstood. We hear it, and we imagine a state of cold, sterile detachment. We picture someone sitting on a distant mountaintop, completely unaffected by the sorrows of the world, numb to heartbreak, and indifferent to joy. We think freedom means escaping the messy, painful reality of human life. But true equanimity is the exact opposite of detachment. It is the deepest, most courageous form of engagement. A person who has cultivated equanimity still feels everything profoundly. When tragedy strikes, their heart still breaks. When beauty surrounds them, they still weep with profound gratitude. They still fall in love, they still build careers, and they still care deeply about the suffering of others. But the fundamental difference lies in their relationship to those experiences. Their minds are no longer violently pushed and pulled by the shifting circumstances of their life. They are no longer hostages to the unpredictable whims of fortune. They meet whatever arises with a steady, unshakable presence. They do not cling desperately to the good moments, demanding they stay forever, and they do not run in terror from the painful moments, demanding they disappear. To truly understand this profound state of being, we can look to one of the most beautiful and ancient metaphors in mindfulness practice, the relationship between the sky and the weather. Imagine, for a moment, the vast, boundless expanse of the clear blue sky. On any given day, the weather moving through that sky is in a state of constant, unpredictable change. Some days, the sky is filled with light, fluffy white clouds and brilliant, warm sunshine. Other days, dark, heavy storm clouds roll in. There is fierce, terrifying lightning, booming thunder, and torrential, driving rain. The weather is chaotic, loud, and sometimes deeply destructive. But if you observe closely, you will realize something profound. The sky never argues with the storm. The sky does not tense up and try to push the dark clouds away. It does not panic when the lightning strikes. The sky simply provides the vast, accommodating space for the weather to exist. And no matter how violent the hurricane, no matter how thick and suffocating the fog, the sky itself is never stained, never bruised, and never fundamentally broken by the weather. Once the storm exhausts its energy and naturally passes, as all storms inevitably do, the sky is still there. It remains exactly as it has always been, infinite, clear, and perfectly whole. In this practice, your pure, observing awareness is the sky. Every single experience you have, your deepest anxieties, your most profound grief, your physical pain, your soaring moments of joy, and your chaotic, racing thoughts, they are simply the weather. When we suffer, it is because we have completely identified with the storm. We believe that we are the dark clouds. We believe that the storm will last forever, and we exhaust ourselves trying to push the thunder away. But true acceptance, true equanimity, is the deep, cellular realization that you are not the temporary weather. You are the vast, untouchable sky. You can allow the heavy clouds of sadness or fear to roll through your awareness without resisting them, knowing intimately that they cannot damage your true nature. You can watch the storm, feel the rain, and remain deeply at peace, knowing that the clear blue sky is always waiting just behind the clouds. This is the ultimate freedom that the Buddhist path promises. It is not a magical freedom from the challenges of life, it is a profound freedom within the very center of life. You do not need to escape to a quiet monastery to find peace. You can find it right here, in the middle of a noisy city, in the middle of a frustrating traffic jam, and in the middle of a broken heart. Freedom is simply the willingness to open your hands, to stop arguing with reality, and to say to the present moment, I see you. I accept you. I am here. And in that brave, quiet surrender, you finally stop fighting the current. You let go of the riverbank, you lean back, and you allow the great river of life to carry you safely forward.